As we welcome to the show Professor Timothy Caulfield, not a professor of political science, but certainly somebody familiar with how government works and the relevance of it in our lives. Were you surprised by Trudeau's resignation?
It had to happen. It had to happen. You could feel it percolating. One of the things I find fascinating, Ryan, is how this is playing internationally, right? You're seeing, the Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post, really framing this internationally as another example of sort of the rise of the right and the demise of the left. And whether that framing is fair or not, we could debate, but that's certainly how it's being positioned. And of course, you're seeing the commentary from Trump as if this was a win for him, as if he played a significant role.
Right.
And so, yeah, absolutely fascinating. Not surprised. For sure, destabilizing.
Yeah, you could. I probably make the argument that Trudeau is more popular right now internationally than domestically. I think you could safely make that argument, maybe with the exception of with the incoming White House when Trump's inaugurated on the 20th of January. We should mention those election results verified, obviously, and the green light given as Joe Biden accepts the loss, Kamala Harris accept the loss officially yesterday on the 6th of January. The timing of that not lost on anybody, but Trudeau certainly seen, I think, on the international stage as somebody that had sort of like adhered to a specific set of values, that sort of had a theme to his tenure, that had kind of a legacy, so to speak. Whereas here at home, we were discussing this on the 6th, we were discussing this in our most previous episode. Feels like a little too soon to have that conversation. Right now, there were people, I saw people going out and buying, cakes to celebrate Trudeau's resignation. Other people kind of disappointed. Some folks keeping it classy. Elizabeth May, the Green Party leader, I think qualifies for that. And then some not so much. It's like the bomb just went off in Canada. The dust hasn't quite settled yet.
Yeah, I was giving talks. My job takes me all over the world. And just in December, Ryan, I was in San Francisco giving a talk, academic audience. And many people say, oh, you're so lucky that you have Trudeau in Canada, this beloved figure. And I go, really? Really? So the disconnect is certainly there. And, many people, I think, in the international community, at least in my community, is a little bit surprised. But as a Canadian, as someone who's been, as an Albertan, I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, there's, I was talking to some people yesterday. We always try to sort of get a sense of where the public's at, have our finger on the pulse, you know what I mean? And I was asking people, what would you characterize as Trudeau's legacy? Like, it's an interesting word to use, right? We use it for mayors, premiers, prime ministers. What was their, maybe CEOs, what was your legacy of your time in office? And sometimes it takes a while, right? Sometimes you can't really evaluate a legacy for 10 or even 20 years, right? But here's some things that people mentioned: affordable childcare, parental leave options, flexible leave, the Canada Child Benefit, tax cuts for the middle class, advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, advancing 2S LGBTQI plus rights and equality, climate action, dental care, pharmacare. I know Jagmeet Singh would probably want to take credit for those two. Renegotiation of NAFTA, the USMCA, medical assistance in dying, cannabis legalization, which was, of course, kind of first out of the gates, strengthened CPP, Senate reform, electoral reform. There was no movement on that file. I know he talked a lot about water on First Nations reserves. That was one that I think that there's some work been done, but still lots of work to do. Managing the pandemic, which was a big one that governments, I think, of all political stripes kind of get to take some credit for, including probably Jason Kenney here in Alberta. A tough go for that former premier. Regardless, he was fighting battles on both sides. You and I have talked about that before. And then, of course, on the flip side, you could ask people, what couldn't they stand about Trudeau, or why did they finally why did he fall out of favor, or why did he never have their favor? And you could probably have a list twice as long. But it was interesting to pick people's brains yesterday, and those are some of the responses I was getting back.
One of the things I find fascinating, and I'm sure you've come across this already, part of the problem with his legacy, the extremely early days to be saying this, was the disconnect between his brand and what people perceive happened, right? So there's that, that element. So, the environment, LGBTQ plus, did he do enough? Did he fulfill his promise, right? This was his brand, and you didn't, that was a failure. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but that's, I think you get these people saying there's this disconnect. It was all about, posturing, but not so much about action, whether that's fair or not. The other interesting thing, I think, is his brand really played into, I think, the rise of the right. And this is something that's more in my space, right? The research that we do in the context of, Trudeau was very much about, wokeness, and I am putting that in quotes. And so for those who are, anti-woke, again, in quotes, he became a figurehead of things that are wrong with our world. Because that was, his brand early days, and it was viewed early days as a very positive aspect of who he was. That was used against him, I think, in the end.
For sure. I mean, probably one of the most damning things that he said, or one of the things that kind of like slipped out. It happens to politicians. They'll say something kind of in passing or flippantly, and then it's used against them for the rest of their term in office. The budget will balance itself. You remember that?
Yeah.
He kind of used it as a throwaway when he said he went. He wanted to talk about something else, and he goes, "The budget will balance itself," and people went, "Oh, will it?" and obviously, I mean, everybody knows the story that played out over the past month or so, with Chrystia Freeland ultimately resigning, refusing to accept the new cabinet assignment, didn't want to deliver that fall economic update that laid out that $62 billion deficit. So I think that's probably where there was, room for some reconciliation between what the brand was supposed to be and what the proof of performance was, right? People would rightfully point out, well, COVID threw a curveball in on a lot of budget measures. You got to kind of evaluate government performance maybe a little bit differently through the COVID years, but you've got to apply that grace to politicians regardless of what their political ideology is.
Yeah, and what you just described is a disconnect that happened within the party too,
Yeah.
right? So this isn't just Canadian citizens viewing this disconnect. It's happening within the party, and when that starts to happen, you know this better than I do. That's when you really start to see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, Bill Bishop is a TEDx, a keynote speaker, and an innovation coach, and he put something out interesting yesterday. Some numbers I thought Real Talkers might be intrigued by. During the Trudeau years, so 2015 to yesterday, the Canadian economy grew by 41% to $3.2 trillion. It grew 18% under Stephen Harper, who governed for roughly the same amount of time. Per capita income grew by more than 23% under Trudeau to $77,700. That's nationwide, according to IMF numbers, International Monetary Fund. That was a 7.6% increase under Stephen Harper. The median net worth of Canadians between 2016 and 2023 soared about 66%. I know not everybody feels that right now, but the median net worth in Canada for Canadians right now, $519,000, according to Statistics Canada. So those are some interesting years. And during the Trudeau years, by the way, America's debt to GDP ratio jumping to 112% from 86%. So Canada ranking better than all G7 countries, all other G7 countries, minus Germany on the debt front as well.
Yeah. So I'm absolutely fascinated by this. And I wrote a piece quite recently for the Toronto Star that touches on this, the massive disconnect between reality, right, and grievances that we see. And again, a lot of this is emanating from the United States, the political strategies in the United States to ferment fear and rage and anger that isn't connected to reality. One of my favorite examples of it is crime, right? This perception that we strongly see in the United States and also in Canada, that crime is, rising. Puliev has pushed this idea that our society's becoming more violent. The reality, especially in the United States, is that it's a 5-decade low, right? And we're talking about countable stuff like violence, property crimes, victimization. But if you ask people in the United States, they say it's, horrible. It's never been this bad. It was so much better in my childhood. That's just not true. It's simply not true. But the disconnect between the perception of what's happening and the reality, that gets people elected. And that's, happening certainly in the United States, but also here in Canada. The economy points that you made, another example of exactly that. And by the way, it's very similar in the UK too. Recent research has demonstrated that too.
I'm encouraging people to check out our December 19th episode. I know that feels like forever ago. That was our final episode in studio of 2024, and a good one, and it still holds up. It's not dated, so to speak. We had the Premier on, Danielle Smith, and Edmonton's Mayor, Amarjeet Sohi, to kind of take a look at the year that was and look ahead. And some interesting points from Sohi, the context of this. That young security guard, you remember, shot and killed, pushed down the stairs, shot in the back and killed just on his third day on the job in an apartment building, very well known to police, literally a few blocks from our studio here, a horrific story. And talking to the mayor about that and his position on it, number one, violent crime is up in Edmonton, but overall crime is down. So those are two interesting statistics to reconcile. Crime is down, but violent crime rates are up. And he made a good point as well, and a fair point as well, is that anecdotal evidence resonates with people. So if you knew the guy that was pushed down the stairs and killed, or if you know that little old lady that was punched in the face at the LRT station, then in your mind, the LRT is not safe. In your mind, we need armed security guards because you heard the story or you knew the person that fell victim.
Yeah, this is exactly why people have these perceptions. And also the media loves these kinds of stories. So, if it bleeds, it leads phenomenon. It also plays to our negativity bias. We remember scary stories. This is a very strong human cognitive bias that we all have. And also, politicians use fear and rage to create, you heard that earlier, people vote for this kind of stuff, right? It works. And this is not just this election cycle, it's happened again and again and again. But the reality is, especially Ryan, if you look over time and if you look internationally, Canada is a very safe country. When I was a kid, it was, people always harken back to the good old days. When I was a kid, it was almost certainly crime was worse then. Almost certainly, right? It was, crime was much higher in the 90s, for example, throughout Canada. But that is not the perception that people have for the exact reason that you say. And look, this is complex. There are absolutely crime issues in Canada that need to be addressed. It's complex, but it's not just this simple picture that we're seeing crimes rising. We need to crack down.
Well, you're in the right place because we vow to this audience and we promise to this audience that we'll venture into the gray areas and we'll dig deep and we'll seek to understand the issues. And grateful to have you here on a big day for you, launch day. You head from our studio straight to the airport as you officially kick off your book tour. Today, the release of your 5th book, right? The Certainty Illusion. What prompted this one?
Well, we live in such a chaotic information environment. I'll tell you, but you write a book over a number of years and it's depressing, Ryan, that my book is more relevant now. It became more relevant each month that I was writing it. It's about this chaotic information environment that we live in. How did we get here? Why is this happening? And I make the argument that we are in the middle of a knowledge crisis, a knowledge production crisis, a knowledge dissemination crisis. There's fake science and misleading science that is out there. There is, fake opinions. There's fake virtuous goals, which I call goodness in the book. And all those things exist precisely because we crave certainty. We crave clarity. We want the right answers. And because of that, clarity and certainty has become a commodity that can be twisted and sold. And this is, I really feel, one of the greatest crises of our time. It is something that we need to deal with at the highest level, like making sure that we do science right, that we communicate it right. But as individuals, we also need to respond.
The timing of this announcement from Meta, one of the world's most influential and most valuable companies, certainly interesting, coinciding with the release of your book. I'm citing CBS reporting here. Meta to end fact-checking, announced CEO Mark Zuckerberg this morning, replacing it with a community-driven system, which sounds a lot like what Elon Musk has done with X. Where's your head at on this?
My head's exploding. So it's like, make it stop, Ryan. I don't need more examples. I don't need more examples of how messy it's getting out there. And this is a really good example of exactly it. Look, the spread of misleading, the spread of lies, the spread of twisted facts. It is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and we need to come at it from absolutely every direction. Yes, we need good independent fact-checking, and research tells us this helps. It's not a magic solution, but research tells us it helps. And the other reason I find this so frustrating is that he's doing this because of the political environment that we now live in. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Elon Musk, the demonization of fighting misinformation, it's all part of that.
He said as much. Did Zuckerberg basically said that the election was a key factor underlying this decision. Said it was a cultural tipping point toward once again prioritizing speech. I'm quoting Mark Zuckerberg. He made the announcement in a video many people have seen, I'm sure. It says, we're going to get rid of fact checkers, replace them with community notes. Starting in the United States, it'll impact Facebook and Instagram as well as Threads. He says the systems that they first put in place in 2016 to moderate the platforms for making too many mistakes in an effort to curb misinformation, said that basically they had included nearly 100 organizations working in more than 60 languages, but says they will continue to moderate content relating to drugs, terrorism, child exploitation, frauds, and scams. I find it's kind of interesting. Johnny, you remember yesterday, we don't have the clip pulled because we decided, we're not going to put this on the show, but we were watching an interview with Candace Owens yesterday. Mm-hmm. How would you characterize the theme of her message? I mean, have you seen this recent interview with Candace?
No,
You're
I can only imagine.
Gosh.
So she's sitting down with Andrew Tate's brother, first of all. He's conducting the interview now in a suit, trying to act professional.
Class it up.
She basically goes on a rant saying that, basically all these world leaders were or are gay. Barack Obama, Justin Trudeau. She makes reference to Macron's wife in France as
Emmanuel
being
Macron's
trans.
married to a trans woman that abused him when he was a child.
Candace Owens, she's saying all this.
She said this yesterday. So this is exactly what you're talking about, Tim. The gates are open now, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that drives me nuts about what you said, Zuckerberg mentioned, is this idea somehow that fighting misinformation is about censorship, about cancel culture, about marginalization, about, and that's just not true. Most of the tools that, people like myself and researchers in this field want to use are about the marketplace of ideas. It's about, creating good content. It's about, pre-bunking and debunking and being part of the conversation. So it's almost like, are you afraid of the marketplace of ideas? Being told you're wrong or being shown you're wrong with facts. That's not censorship, right? That is the marketplace of ideas. But unfortunately, in this world we live in now, that is being portrayed as if it is censorship, as if it is being canceled. Doing things like deplatforming. I'm actually a very, very strong advocate of freedom of expression, Ryan, despite what my haters say. I think that things like deplatforming and strong government regulation are instruments of last resort and should be used only when, in a transparent manner, in a way that liberal democracies agree they should be used. We have laws for a whole bunch of things, right? But most of the tools in this space are about our information environment. They are about the marketplace of ideas. So it's completely disingenuous for these individuals to suggest that somehow it's about censorship and freedom of expression.
Yeah, I think, and people like with two brain cells are looking at this and recognizing, as a reminder, Mark Zuckerberg did ban Donald Trump from Facebook following the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And since then, since Trump won the election just a short time ago, this past November, Zuckerberg has donated $1 million. He's dined with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. They're kind of welcoming him back to Facebook, kind of an opportunity, I guess, for him, or an effort, let me say, to repair that relationship. And you wonder, though, I mean, if Facebook takes the step, I mean, it's a tough look to announce you're stopping fact checking. Like, that's a wild thing to say out loud, especially without context around it. But if indeed you are doing it simply to earn the favor of the incoming president of the United States, what does it say about the company and the platform, which carries immense influence globally, easily one of the world's most used sites? And what does it say about the incoming president of the United States, right? I mean, those are two different conversations to be had that are important ones.
But what does it say also about the complete normalization and legitimization of bunk, of BS, right? Which, we've witnessed again and again and again. And in my field, we have people like RFK Jr. who are undoubtedly going to get confirmed. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't, Dr. Oz, on and on and on. We're living in a world, sometimes, in my darker moments, Ryan, I feel like we're on the cusp of a dark age 2.0, where knowledge doesn't have any any meaning anymore. And if I could get a little bit philosophical for a moment,
We welcome it.
I always find it incredible that this postmodern idea, right? Think Foucault, you go back to your university days, right? Where all knowledge was relative, right? I can remember when that was a hard left idea, right? That, power makes the knowledge and all knowledge is relative. So here you have this sort of hard left idea being embraced and used by the far right to gain power, to destabilize knowledge across democracies around the world in order to make anything that they declare true to be true. There's no truth anymore. And I find that just a deep, deep irony. Foucault's spinning in his grave. How did we get here?
On our Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider, Super Chat Ken says, Meta to end fact checking is the funniest thing I've read today. He says Facebook fact checked before. That was kind of the point I was making with Candace Owens. I was, to be honest, if I'm being 100% honest and forthright with you, I was unaware that Meta did have fact checking because I just have seen so much out there that's so ridiculous that I just assumed that you kind of got a pass unless somebody filed a complaint or reported it.
We needed more fact checking. We didn't need less fact checking. And the other thing that's incredible are people like Candace Owen and others, Tucker Carlson, you could go down the list. They complain about being silenced and being marginalized. And, and partly they do that because they want to portray themselves as heroes of, fighting for your rights. When the reality is all their narratives were dominant narratives. They weren't, it's just something that we've studied. They weren't marginalized at all. They're on the world's most popular podcast, complaining about being silenced, or they're on the world's most popular cable news show complaining about being silenced, or they're sitting in the Oval Office complaining about being silenced. And that narrative worked. It worked.
So in your book, and if you're just joining us, live streaming across 7 different platforms. You heard about this, eh?
Yes,
We've expanded our live
great
stream
idea.
to 7 platforms presented by California Closets. We're talking to Professor Timothy Caulfield, his new book, The Certainty Illusion, What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. Why do you think that certainty is so alluring to people? We're not talking about truth. We're not talking about facts. We're talking about certainty, even if it leads them astray.
For exactly the reasons that we're talking about today. It's just the information is so chaotic. Our information environment, never in human history have we been bombarded with so much information as we are now. It's incredibly polarized. People want a path forward. They want clarity. Research shows this again and again and again, right? So certainty and clarity have become a valuable commodity, right? And because of that, the tools that we use to find certainty and clarity are incentivized to be twisted. One of my favorite examples in the book is, reviews, online reviews, 5-star reviews, right? This may seem like a trivial point, and it's a topic that I really enjoyed because I didn't know that much about it before I started researching it. But those reviews move trillions of dollars, right?
Oh, for sure. Are you talking about everything like restaurant reviews?
Yeah, from restaurant
podcast
reviews to
whatever.
getting your doctor to your vacuum clean. Who buys anything without checking reviews anymore,
Sure.
right? Because those reviews, Ryan, are so valuable, right? Of course they're being twisted. Of course they're being manipulated. So they're either fake, right? Or they're incentivized, or all the cognitive biases that we all have day to day are having an impact on the reviews. And the fascinating thing I find about that is that despite I researched this for years, I still look at reviews. There's a section in the, and this is a true story in the book where I'm not making this up. I was working on that chapter, and my wife was complaining about our broken dishwasher. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about how, these reviews are fake. You can't trust them. And she's talking about all the great reviews for the dishwashers. And by the way, I give our new dishwasher 5 stars.
Oh, do you?
But yeah.
Did you actually go and give it 5 stars, or you just saying
No,
it
I'm just
cynically?
saying, well, that's, who goes, that's another important cognitive bias, right? Who actually gives the reviews?
Let me show you something interesting.
Yeah.
And this is only on my radar because I talked to our executive producer yesterday, and we're working on our new print ads. We advertise in a few different magazines. So check this out. Johnny, you can show my screen if you like. So this is Real Talk's reviews on Apple Podcasts in particular. particular. This is a shout out to our podcast listeners. Please go ahead and review us. We really appreciate it. But you can see 671 people have reviewed us. We're carrying a 4.6 out of 5
Which, by the way, is almost a perfect review.
Well, that's not bad. I don't mind it. But you know what's really funny is if you look at the graph here that it shows you, and we'll describe it for the podcast listeners, it's almost all 5 stars and 1 stars.
Well, there'll be another 1 star after today.
So
Don't worry.
Yeah. I will say that the podcast reviews are kind of like Uber reviews. So when Tim said 4.6 is perfect, it's not. Like most, if it's a good show, has 4.7 and higher, right? So this bugs us
I 100%
a little.
disagree with this guy.
Just because you can tell...
Johnny.
If you click on the 1-star reviews,
Yeah.
you can see they're just haters.
Well,
right?
that's what I mean. But what good show worth its salt doesn't have haters?
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Like, I actually don't know anybody on planet Earth that has more haters than you, Tim. I'm not joking. I'm serious, man. Your tweets bring people out of the woodwork. I thought that I had my detractors. Holy. I mean, is that a sign to you that you're doing something right?
It can be maddening, right? Because they're lies and smear. They have this fake version of me that they're attacking, right? This straw man version of Tim that they're attacking. It has nothing to do with my real life, but it is incredible. Your review, by the way, is the sweet spot because you don't want 5 stars because people
nobody believes it.
Yeah. So it's like the Goldilocks, right? So I think it's 4.2 to 4.6. So and generally you get
Johnny's just bitter because his Uber rating is lower than mine.
What's your Uber rating?
My Uber? No, we talked about this before.
What
happened
he
is
puked in an Uber once.
I went down to 4.2 at one point, and I had no idea why.
4.2. That's disastrous. Mine's 4.97.
I know. So now mine's a 4.85 or something, which is great because you have to be above 4.7. No one will pick you up. I don't even know why people were picking me up. But Ryan said to me, I said, listen, I get out of the thing. I always leave a good review. I always tip. And then Ryan said, well, I tip if it's great, but I don't tip all the time. Yeah. I stopped tipping and my rating went up. I have no idea why.
So can I tell a frivolous, funny Uber story? So I used to have a 5.0. I used to have a 5.0 Uber rating. I was super proud of that.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm in the car with my son, and we're in the United States, and I order an Uber, and the Uber driver... my son starts complaining about why, how come it took the Indians so long to change their name, and Kansas City Chiefs. That's such an offense. My son's saying this, such an offensive name.
Okay.
And the Uber driver starts arguing with him. There's a history to these names. How they don't mean what you're saying anymore. They've taken on another meaning. And my son and this Uber driver start getting this really intense argument, and I can see my rating going down as it's happening. And so here I'm like, well, Adam, my son, he's making a lot of good points here, even though I don't believe it. Just to keep that rating, Ryan.
You know what would have been my absolute favorite? You remember those Ottawa Senators players that got screwed over back in the day?
Oh,
Because the Uber driver released the dash cam footage of their conversation in the backseat, complaining about the coach, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you imagine the Uber driver releasing the video of Tim Caulfield arguing against the Cleveland Indians changing their name? That would have been my favorite video of the year.
It was like an SNL skit. It was absolutely hilarious. And then sure enough, I get out, and there goes my...
Just so you know, Tim, you have 1,000 negative reviews on your book that just launched today.
Just launched
on
today.
Amazon. No, I'm just
Don't do this to me.
1.5 stars. No. By the way, I'm a 4.93 on Uber. So there you go. But I've dropped. I think I was
Really?
4.96 when you and I talked about it. So let me ask you this. There's and I'm only half kidding when I talk about your haters because it's legit. I mean, I follow your social media posts and it's unbelievable. I've never really seen anything like it. And I think what a lot of people don't like is your confidence in science, your confidence in evidence. So how does your book, The Certainty Illusion, address the role of science communicators in balancing confidence with humility?
Well, that's actually, I have a chapter on scientific humility. And I think this is a really, really important point. I highlight the degree to how important it is to think about the nature of the science that you're looking at, right? It's not about anecdotes. It's about the body of evidence. Science is hard, and it requires humility to look at it. And when you are, that I think affords you the opportunity when something is certain to speak of it with a degree of certainty. In the book, I have this test that I think we should all do. Because there's good evidence to say if you adopt scientific humility, which basically means you recognize science is hard, that the science is evolving, that you can change your mind. So how many times, create a list that you've changed your mind on something because of the evidence evolving, right? Maybe you just modified your belief or absolutely changed it. And I have a long list that I put in the book. And if you don't have a list, that's a problem, right? Because changing your mind because of the science, because of the evidence, should be a badge of honor. It's not flip-flopping. It's following the science. And I think more of us need to do that. And we have to stop demonizing people based on, a comment they made, a decade ago about wine being good for you. And now we know, less is best kind of thing. So that I think is really, really important. But Ryan, it's also important to make compelling content that's going to cut through the noise. That's not easy to balance those two things. Recognizing scientific uncertainty, respecting it, but at the same time making compelling content. Just because it's hard doesn't mean we can't do it, but that is a tough balance to make. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong.
Hey, man, congratulations on the new book. I know that a lot went into this. I remember last time you were here on the show, you were talking to us about the work that was going into it, how excited you were to get it published. And I would imagine that it's got to feel like a big day, launch day. We're grateful to have you here with us just ahead of your trip to the airport. Thanks for doing
thanks
it.
so much. Thrilled I could share it with you guys. Really appreciate it.
I will leave you a positive review today, Tim.
I want 2 5 stars.
You'll get 2 5 stars.
Dig it right after the interview.
And I think that if this holds true, if our Real Talk live chat, I saw, you got some haters in here, but you got a ton of supporters too. When you first came on the show, there was a bunch of exclamation marks in all caps. Tim. So there you go.
Thanks so much,
people can
guys.
buy your book wherever they find good books.
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. It's The Certainty Illusion. It's the brand new one from Professor Timothy Caulfield, a great friend of the show. Happy New Year to you and yours.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for doing this.